Chapter 9. Paris.
She's dead?
Lolita exclaimed, her brown eyes widening in surprise. We had just wrapped up a week at the Institute of Contemporary Art, attending an exhibition for Mia Sanchez in Miami, and were due to arrive in Paris in 2 days' time for the grand opening of the gallery. Mia was an Argentinian-born artist whose focus was on South American postmodernism and geometric blends. Her sold-out show, titled Cartografa, was a success. Mia was an established artist and had been creating since the 80s, expressing the struggles of women in her war-torn country. She was a mixed media specialist and had managed to cultivate a wide variety of pieces. Oil on canvas, figurative paintings that symbolized the effigies of civil rights activists in bright hues. Canvas paintings stretched over wooden structures that resemble female shapes and the difficulty of surviving during a cultural revolution. Hundreds of priceless installations that were combined into an exhibition honoring her lengthy career. We had finally had a moment to ourselves between the whining, dining, and catering to clients new and old in South Beach. Miami was sex embodied. The wild nightclub ambiance, the yachts, the people. A blur of tan skin, designer outfits, and extremely white teeth. Miami was exceptional, and for a moment I allowed myself to forget about the awful pain of knowing my one love had loved another. That ended when Lolita asked me over brunch at Savoy how my time in London had been. The restaurant was exquisite, a sublime mix of coastal and modern architecture that blended seamlessly. Pillars of bronze material with minimalist faces by Philippe Starck were the support for the covered patio, allowing us to be bathed in the balmy late September air without being baked in the sun. The faces seemed to peer out at the dining guests, ever present and watchful, hiding in plain sight. The only reason we were able to escape from the madness of the trip was Siobhan. She was exceptional, irreplaceable, coordinating client meetings, gallery necessities, and assisting Lolita and I with whatever odds and ends that inevitably appeared during the week-long madness. And so, with my heart in my throat, we settled down to a brunch of salmon, poached eggs, green smoothies, and a devastating story. The expression on her face mirrored that of my soul. Shock, disbelief, sadness, and a tinge of anger. I told her how it happened, when it happened, laying the story before my best friend, waiting tentatively for her wizened input. "That's awful," she finally said, shaking her head slightly, as if to clear it from the darkness of the story I just told. It was. Lolita and I both had our parents still. We had not yet been confronted with a major loss of life thus far, and the thought of this young man shouldering that burden alone was just that. Awful. "I know." "And he loved her." It wasn't a question. I answered it anyway. "Yes, very much." "And do you love him again?" I paused. Lolita waited expectantly for an answer. The bronze pillars continued their watch, waiting. I never stopped. She sipped her green smoothie and sat forward in her chair, her hands clasped neatly under her chin as she thought. I felt a pull toward my lifelong friend after Hayes's revelation, a deep-seated need to hear her thoughts. The last time the two of us were in this particular city, she had confronted me about the depth of my feelings for him, the honesty I needed. I craved to hear her thoughts on this. Of all the secrets I thought Hayes had, this was nowhere near the top of the list.
"I understand why he did it, why he kept this from you. It's hard to fathom that kind of sadness, the torture of living every day without one but two people you care deeply about. It's unthinkable. And so when he got one of those people back in his life, I imagine he would hide that from you as long as possible to keep you," she said finally, her voice sure, composed. I winced at her words. I had been the one to leave him, hurting him further. Lolita saw my flinch and reached a slender hand across the table to grasp mine with affection. "You had to leave him then. The circumstances would not have allowed you to last. Isabel, the paparazzi, Things have changed. You have changed. Don't be at war with yourself for hurting him then. He's forgiven you for that. The most important question, can you forgive him for this? She said, lifting a bite of eggs into her mouth while I composed my thoughts. I already have, I said, after a long moment, taking a drink from my own verdant concoction. Have you? She probed, pointing her fork in my direction for emphasis. Sharp. I love him, Lalit, I said simply. That was my explanation for the inexplicable. The reason behind my forgiveness, for my understanding. Love above all else had won out. Won against the hurt, the betrayal, the disappointment. Those named emotions still existed. I could call upon them if I allowed myself to. They beckoned beneath the surface, competing for a place on the forefront of my heart. I could have succumbed to them. Later, when I would recall our time in London, that's what I would think of, that it would have been easier to let him go in that moment. But now, in Miami, 1,000 miles away from him, my love for him overshadowed any negative feelings. I only felt gratitude that he was here. He was alive. Through darkness and turmoil and loss and fear, he chose to stay, to live. The idea of him not existing in this world made my stomach plummet and my heart pause. A possibility that was far closer to reality than I could have ever imagined. I wanted to die too for a while, he whispered, late one night in London. Nothing but our sweat covering us. We had come back from dinner at Fallow, slightly drunk on the freedom we both shared before calling it a night and returning to his home. We lay together, his large form curled around my back, his mouth near my ear on the pillow we shared. He said it quietly, as though he just needed to say the words aloud without needing to be heard. But I did hear. I was on the verge of sleep, and that sentence had my eyes flashing wide, the meaning in them. He felt my awareness shift and pulled me closer to him, pressing every inch of bare skin flush to mine, comforting me, like I was the one who spoke, like I was the one who wanted to escape, as though it was me who needed the comfort of his touch. He lightly traced his fingers down the swell of my shoulder, over the curve of my elbow to my hand, following the path of the blue veins that carried life within me. He traced this pattern over and over without saying more. Minutes passed without either of us speaking. Why didn't you? He paused, contemplating before that singular finger embarked on a new path past the hand folded under my cheek and across my face. Slow and careful, covering the arch of my nose down over my lips, continuing to my throat and pausing only for a moment on the pulse beat there. Along my collarbone, down to my breast, circling over the pale flesh once. And then, as if in answer to my question, he pressed his palm firmly against my heart. I love you, I said again, not caring that he had yet to return the sentiment. I knew. If London held everything of the past, then Paris was a promise of our future, a Renaissance city for art, music, dance, and for us. Our own rebirth, growing anew. I stayed in London as long as I could. With the gallery opening in a few weeks and a trip to Miami in between, it was pushing the limit. But as I'd come to learn, the limit does not exist with Hayes Campbell. We were more inseparable than usual in London, a subtle shift in his demeanor from our previous meetings. Every evening stroll around his upscale neighborhood, every dinner, every morning, he was there, touching me always, a large hand on my waist, a finger hooked into my bracelet, a thumb dragging over his ring, constantly showing me in some small way that he was here, with me. As if by touching me, he could begin to erase the impact of his secret. We did not speak of her again during the last few days of my time in his home. We seemed to both need the silence to settle,
to become comfortable with the shadow of her in our relationship. He seemed lighter, more at ease, unburdened. The circles under his eyes lessened with our late mornings and relaxed days. No more nightmares visited our bed. It was just us, and we tangled over and over again, driving away the depths of the darkness every time our bodies joined, unable to satiate our respective needs, though we certainly did our best. The feeling that usually happened when I left him had not resurfaced. The impending threat of the public, of the fans, of the paparazzi, the magnitude of things that crept in on our own little world and tried desperately to cling to us. Not one tweet, no Instagrams, no graffiti on the wall, no threatening messages at the gallery, no fans, nothing. Utter silence from all the noise that once was poised to strike and overwhelm the two of us. The frenzy that seemed inalienable from him, from me, from us. I knew more now how he did it. He had circumvented the idea of him. It was something he cherished, his privacy. His social media manager and Jeff carefully calculating every post, every release of information, a distraction, a screen, a protective bubble. I felt it every time we left the cocoon of his home and he had no reason to don a cap. The unguarded touches, the boisterous nature of his in all settings. Something I would not have thought possible 5 years before. On my last day, he rode all the way to Heathrow with me in the back of the tinted Mercedes that was customized with his own partition, allowing us complete privacy. His thumb circling mine in his lap, sitting next to me in the back seat. We said very little, both seeming to dread the impending separation, however brief it may be. After we pulled to the entrance, he unbuckled his seatbelt and slid closer to me. He pressed the button that allowed him to speak to the driver. "Hold here for a moment, please," he said, without taking his eyes off of mine. He brought both hands to either side of my face, cupping it gently. "Thank you," he said quietly, leaning forward to brush his lips against mine. I laughed lightly, taken for a moment by his farewell. "For what exactly are you thanking me? I'm pretty sure we stayed at your place, and you wouldn't let me pay for a single thing." He laughed, the sound like music. It was so sweet. "For being mine, Solène," he said, and the smile that crossed that perfect mouth was heart-stopping, his fingers making their way into my long hair and onto the back of my neck, persistent. "Have I agreed to that?" He laughed again. "I didn't ask permission." I kissed him fully and swiftly on the mouth at that declaration, loving that he felt that way, that I was his, to belong to him again. "I'll see you in Paris," I said, untangling from his nearness and opening the door. "See you in Paris," he replied, the promise in those words lightening my heart. Once a mid-sized gallery, we were now opening our third space. Being a single mom to a teenage daughter was often not conducive to a work-life balance. Isabel was older, Daniel was more stationary, and once the sale of art to the Obamas was completed, it seemed we would have our opportunity to grow. Expansion as an art gallery is no small feat. The organization, the travel required, the time spent in negotiations with realtors and clients and artists becomes near impossible. Being heartbroken and 40 years old, with a drive to distraction, the expansion of Marchand Raphael could not have happened at a more perfect time. Our gallery was located in the Montmartre in the 18th. The 3-story building within walking distance to fine dining and shopping, and with a coveted view of the Sacré-Cœur. It was beautiful, but had required a near-complete renovation before Lolite and I would have been satisfied with it. The old structure had reeked of old world, with dark, moody walls, parquet floors, gold trims, and every door and fixture changed to align with the aesthetic. We kept the character of the building while transforming it into a space that was fit for contemporary art. leaving the beautiful exposed brick wall and the rounded doorways, adding in white walls to the center of the space to showcase art. It flowed, each floor able to accommodate one staging area or two, depending on how each installation was planned. For the grand opening, we had worked with Louise Armand to develop the concept and design for our opening. She was native to Paris and had assisted in the installation design for several of our other showings across the world. The opening would span 2 days, the soft opening on Friday and then the grand opening Saturday. She had planned perfectly which pieces would be rotated should we manage to have a sellout show. Floor 1 would boast Katrina's work, the bronze statues staggered in neat rows growing in size, grouped by which phase of the apartheid era the pieces represented. Floor 2 was home to Ariel's collection, laid out in a similar fashion as our previous show in LA, many new works needing to be included after her success. Floor 3 would boast Heinz's reliefs. He had no particular requirements, giving full autonomy to Louise. She poured through and studied each piece and had managed to organize them emotionally, the viewer's feelings ebbing and flowing as the installation progressed. Hayes had an engagement back in Inverness and vowed to make it for the grand opening on Saturday. "So you aren't nervous," I'd said. We had called on Thursday late, the high of the impending opening preventing me from sleep, and the fact that instead of attending the vastly more secluded soft opening, his schedule for whatever reason would only permit from Saturday onward. To say I was concerned was putting it lightly. There would no doubt be press present. "No, I'm a B-list celebrity, remember?" he said, laughing, casting off my worries. If only he knew. I'll try to call again later this week. I hope school is going well, honey. I love you. Bisous, I said, leaving Isabel my third voicemail in the last 7 days. With the 9-hour time difference and our respective busy schedules, I had not been able to talk to her since Miami. It was at least mildly distressing. I had debated internally for days about when to tell her and had made up my mind that it would either be in Paris or back home. I preferred to do it in person, but the lingering worry about not disclosing Hayes to her made me consider a phone call. Perhaps the ramifications for both of us would be better if we had had an ocean between us. Perhaps. I pocketed my phone in my bag before returning inside to place it into the spacious office Lilith and I shared. It was nearly 8, and the ribbon had been cut an hour prior. Both Lilith and I standing in front of the red door, posing for West France and Le Pron before answering questions and welcoming the 150 guests inside. The soft opening the night before had proved successful, Franz selling 6 out of 15 pieces, and the same for Katrina, requiring the installments to be adjusted earlier this morning. It had been a hectic day, and knowing Hayes was due to arrive at any moment kept my energy elevated. I reconnected with Siobhan on the first floor. "We have another client interested in the largest Graham piece," she said fervently, her slim arm wrapping around my shoulders and giving me a brief squeeze before passing me a flute of Dom Perignon. Her excitation was near palpable. She gestured with her own flute to a young woman standing in front of a 5-foot-tall statue of a girl on a black pedestal encased in vertical bars, trapped in the prison of her country's making. I was beginning to make my way to her, unsure if she herself was buying or if she was here on behalf of an employer, someone so rich they could not be bothered to buy their own art. She was young, perhaps early 30s, dark brown hair, glowing tan skin, full lips, absolutely one of the most beautiful women here. She was tall, but not willowy, her toned legs ending in Christopher Esber shoes. It was getting harder to tell these days, those who were old money versus those who desired to be that way. She turned her attention to me, greeting me warmly with a smile and extending her hand. I shook it politely, her grip firm. "Céline Marchand, thank you for attending. My assistant tells me that you're interested in this piece," I asked, withdrawing my hand and flagging a server making the rounds with the drinks. I handed her a full glass of bubbling liquid when she responded with her name, Laura Ribeiro. Yes, I am. I have ancestors from South Africa. This is breathtaking. Her voice was cultured, smooth. I suspected she hailed from Brazil or some other South American country. She was elegant and young. Her long fingers grasped the tall glass with gentleness, a dance-like quality to her movement. We stepped together slowly, rounding the structure, taking it in. It is. The piece is phosphorus, bronze atop reclaimed labradorite granite from South Africa. That type of bronze is usually used for making things like ship propellers and anchors and has a high content of phosphorus, giving it the green hue. The blue-green color complements the granite. It can be used as an outdoor centerpiece or a statement piece within the home, I said, our steps neatly coordinating, almost sashaying around the statue. Her brown eyes never left the structure, nodding as she took in my explanation, keen but not overeager. I'll take it, she said, smile growing as she continued to look at the piece, not asking for the price. Definitely shopping for herself. The noise in the gallery decreased by a decibel, faintly, just enough to signal the entrance of someone with dozens of people whispering about simultaneously. I felt it, felt him. I began a revolution to turn around and greet him when I caught a glimpse of Laura's face. And by the expression, there it was clear. She felt him too. Seeing this froze me in my tracks. My back remained to him. His hand came around my waist, serpent-like, curling me into his side with a familiar possessiveness. Laura's eyes flickered to where his hand made its final destination, a flash of surprise showing on her face, which was irksome, as though it was shocking that someone like him would choose someone like me. It ignited anger in me, quick and short-lived, long enough for me to make a rash decision. I turned to raise my face to his, momentarily seeing his mildly alarmed smile and worried eyes, and I gave him a kiss on the cheek that was millimeters away from the edge of his lush mouth, inhaling his lime and grapefruit scent, making my stance to the young collector abundantly clear with a distinctively non-air kiss. When I pulled back, he looked genuinely startled, and had we not been in this particular situation, I would have laughed. He cleared his throat and stepped back a fraction. He looked striking in a forest-green suit, so dark it almost appeared black. The cream shirt he wore underneath, it was understated. No tie. The matching pants ending in ostrich leather boots. It was possibly the most unique and beautiful ensemble I had seen him wear to date. She knew him. That was clear. Whether or not that was in the carnal sense remained to be seen. Hayes, she said, moving forward as if to embrace him. Sensing this, Hayes lifted his hands smoothly in greeting. Good man. She recovered swiftly, shaking his hand and letting her smile grow. Flicking her hair over her shoulder, her confidence obviously remaining intact. I'm sorry, and you are? He asked, with a tone of indifference, withdrawing his hand and sliding closer to me, warmth spreading along my side where his body connected to mine. She rocked back on her heel slightly, stunned at his dismissal. This is Laura. Laura, you know Hayes? I said after a beat, waiting for either of them to reveal how they know each other. She swallowed a sip of her champagne, clearing her throat. We met eons ago in another life, she said, laughing, slightly shrugging off his aloofness and taking a half step back from the two of us. Pleasure doing business with you, Solène. My assistant will contact yours. Have a lovely evening, she said, continuing her path away from us. She saluted us with her half-full glass before taking the final gulp and swaying away. Hayes leaned down, nuzzling my hair, the nervous energy receding from him as the moments passed. Hi, he said into my hair, squeezing me into his side and lifting me on to my toes. Hi, I said, handing him my flute and allowing him to take a generous sip. His green eyes winked at me from the crystal rim. They were rich green, made more so by the color of his suit. Care to explain? He seemed to think for a moment, drawing his hand down across the strap of my cream Carla Zapata sheath dress before reaching my hand. He fingered the pulse point underneath his bracelet for a moment before speaking. "I can think of other things I'd rather do at the moment," he said. "Such as talk about art with you." I didn't respond immediately to this, trusting that he would tell me eventually, but not able to shake the slightly tense feeling that permeated. We ascended up the second floor, past the milling patrons and clients to the third floor. The pieces were gloomy and elicited an odd mix of foreboding and hope. Each piece had its own unique shape and structure, giving the work a sense of movement. We halted near one of the first canvases. This one lacked the usual smattering of black or brown paint, instead explicitly using nails without any other medium, bare and stark. "Tell me," he said, nodding toward the canvas. I paused to collect my thoughts. This piece is unusual, one of the only ones he chose to abandon paint when creating. If you look at the nails closely, you can see that they are placed intentionally at an angle. That gives the art shape and momentum, and it almost feels like it's moving, changing and morphing as you move past it. The artist was inspired by other creators like Otto Pena and Gunther Ecker, who were a part of the Zero movement. I felt him watching me the entire time I talked, feeling the weight of his gaze on my face. "And the Zero movement is?" prompted. I took my glass back from him and rolled the stem repeatedly between my fingers, realizing that he was asking not just to hear me speak, but because he cared. He knew this is what I loved, that this is what filled me and propelled me, and allowing me to relax into this, leaving the worry about Laura behind. He sidled up to me, his fingers finding the crease of my elbow and lightly touching the skin there, unable to resist touching me. It was one of the more revolutionary avant-garde movements that inspired the focus to be on the materials themselves instead of the artist's influence. The reflection of movement of Germany in a new direction, away from World War II, a revival. He nodded in understanding, taking in my somewhat lengthy explanation. "A rebirth," he said, voice somewhat low amid the buzz of conversation. "A rebirth," I confirmed. He flagged a server down, rings flashing in the ambient light. He thanked her and deftly picked his own glass off the silver tray. He turned to face me, fully raising his glass in a toast, his eyes meeting mine and holding my gaze, strong and sure. "To new beginnings," he said, wistfulness and desire filling his words. "Nouveau départ," I replied. It was later, much later, that he felt compelled to explain. We had departed from the dwindling crowd at our opening and were transported down the Champs-Élysées-La Cinq. We were seated just the two of us directly underneath a neoclassical acrylic landscape by Robert Adams, the white tablecloth blending in with the lilies and the greenery that acted as a partition to our other side. We were halfway through the foie gras and sweet Pinot Gris when we decided to acknowledge the somewhat awkward encounter at the gallery. "I never slept with her," he said, without preamble. I had been studying the green trees depicted in the landscape of the 5-foot-long painting, looking at the stippling of the branches and leaves when he said it, and forced myself to meet his gaze. He had unbuttoned his shirt and allowed a necklace to peek through. That was new. It was gold and thin and somewhat feminine, but it suited him. I raised my brow at this, waiting for him to elaborate further, and not believing him for a second. He swirled the glass of wine and set it down without taking a sip, moving his other hand and briefly touching the necklace at his throat. Shifting slightly, he said, "She was Oliver's friend, for a while, before the band split, but she—" the rest of his sentence fading as he lifted one shoulder in a shrug. "But she wanted you," I said, finishing his thought for him. He nodded then, in confirmation. "You didn't take advantage? She seemed most willing." He laughed at this, at my blunt question. "I could have, yes, but I had no interest in anyone, and I was tempted for all the wrong reasons," he answered, evasive. "Such as?" He swallowed the golden wine, allowing the question to linger. "It would have hurt Oliver, and believe me, I wanted to," he said, the words laced with a touch of anger in them. His relationship with Oliver had always puzzled me, but retaliation had never been Hayes's MO. It surprised me that he not only wanted to inflict hurt on Oliver, but that he would admit it. "Why did you want to?" I probed. His hand on the white cloth curled slightly, as if he wanted to make a fist. "Those sort of things are not fit to discuss over dinner," he replied, voice low and dangerous. I'd never heard that tone from him before. It was unexpected, and so was the accompanying flare of attraction it stirred in me. I had never considered viciousness an appealing quality in a man, but Hayes Campbell wore violence well. It was a lavish trip. He spoiled me, sparing no expense, treating me in a way I always craved to be treated. I recalled the last time we had visited the city together, the way he had held his own in conversation at dinner with my colleagues and friends, the bracelet he had given me, our many nights at the hotel, and the dizzying feeling of falling in love in Paris in October. One would have thought it impossible to surpass the loveliness of our previous trip here, but he managed to do it just that. He regaled me with tales of his life since leaving the band and the experience of working with Taylor Swift, her passion and poise and dedication. We promenaded around the Bas du Boulogne, Adam and Christopher, our watchful protectors, and barrier from the other Parisians bundled against the cool air. He indulged me in several runs through the green Vicennia and along the Seine. We had a spa day at the Molitor, both of us relaxing after lengthy massages and a decadent soak in the pool. My position at the gallery allowing me to break away frequently, no longer pressed to work for days on end. I could spend a little or as much time there as I pleased. The gallery was there to stay. The sweetness of our French rendezvous peaked when I discovered he rented out the entire contemporary floor of Musée National des Arts Modernes for me. We were zipping along the Rue des Passés, past the Pont des Aignes and the aquarium, the Eiffel Tower looming in the distance. We had finished a run that morning and were now making our way to the gallery to meet Lolita, or so I thought. I was riding aimlessly, watching the trees and warmly dressed people blur past when I realized that we were not going in the direction of the gallery any longer. I turned to him with a somewhat confused expression on my face, and he allowed a partial smile to show. "Where are we going, Hayes?" "You'll see." My heart swelled as we rounded the corner and sped toward the Musée National des Arts Modernes. I instantly recognized the unique ascending staircase with the rouge lining and underneath and the masculine industrial exterior. My pulse escalated. "We're going here? How is that possible?" I asked nervously, initially fraught with worry. How would we peruse the enormous space without being spotted by a fan or passerby? The anxiety of being caught on a date overpowering the flash joy that he was taking me to do something I loved. "You'll see," he repeated, cryptic, seeming to sense my worried thoughts and the reason behind them. We drove past the patrons waiting in a queue to enter the building and circled the periphery until we parked next to a woman waiting at an unassuming door. She waved as we approached, greeting both Hayes and I by name and opening the door and walking briskly to an elevator, the lanyard from her neck swinging jauntily as she walked. I was listening to her introduction, still bewildered, and retained my nervous edge. We passed a group of conservators as we walked the short distance to the elevator. They glanced up from their smartphones and quickly looked back down, unbothered, no recognition. No awareness of a star amongst them. We arrived at a massive black elevator, and she passed her hand against the button and said in French, "Hit number 6. It is as you wished, Mr. Campbell. Enjoy yourselves." I turned toward him perplexed as the elevator doors closed, and he finally spoke, smug. "The 6th floor has been closed for a private event until the evening." A pause. "A private event?" I asked, my eyes widening at the implication of his words. He couldn't have. He reached a hand across the space between us and grabbed my own, the one with his bracelet, fingering the pulse point there. Private, me and you, no one else. The museum was a cornerstone of contemporary art around the world and housed a plethora of classics as a part of their permanent collection. Giorgio de Chirico, Pollock, and Yves Klein were just a few of the artists who had installations that would remain permanently. The sixth floor was reserved for rotating temporary exhibitions that changed often, and it was this floor that Hayes had reserved for us. I remember walking amongst these halls often on my many work trips to Paris, spending hours trailing the first floor, viewing the pieces that were to belong in the building indefinitely, or walking to the fifth or sixth floor to see what new and exciting artists had been creating, or works that traveled around the world to be viewed by many. It was a familiar activity until now. The sixth floor was home to 3 collections by Swiss artist and sculptor Hans Josephson. Josephson was born at a time of war and terror, a Jew in 1930s Prussia. The trauma he endured during his formative years was reflected in his structures that oscillated between figurative interpretations and abstract ones. We walked through 3 installations that followed the artist's development from his more simplistic air and the concrete nature of his statues to the later works that were decidedly more interpretative. It was odd to experience art this way. The silence and the white walls and the echoes of our hushed discussion as we looked at the many bronze and stone sculptures. Our walk had paused in front of a statue of a woman laying on her side, rough-hewn bronze that was massive in her proportions, excessively feminine, and a transition from his previous, more simplified works from the room before. This referenced a change in his personal life, I said softly, nodding my head toward the woman. The bronze was rough and jagged, contrasted with the soft, womanly shape of bust and hip and thigh. He had a new model and a lover that influenced him until they separated, an homage to her and her impact on his life. Hayes's hand found his way to mine earlier in our private viewing, and his thumb paused its rhythmic brushing at my comment. It's subtle, but it's there, he agreed, seeming to mull over what I said. I wondered if he could empathize, if this art had morphed with the changes of his lovers, from me to her and back. We continued our route, weaving between the evenly spaced structures when Hayes blurted at a normal volume, almost laughing. "Why do we whisper?" he asked, voice loud and reverberating through the space. I flinched at it, but my own laughter joined his unwillingly, his excitement contagious. Because normally there are hundreds of people here and the art doesn't need to be disturbed by loud voices, I said, watching him as he ran a lap around the statues laughing. No one to watch him and judge or to view him in his true form. He seemed to skip toward me and wrapped his arms around my waist to spin me in a circle, my toes kicking out with our revolution. We finished our spin and he set me down, the tips of my toes landing on his leather boots. He kept me in his arms, holding me pressed against him, and walked me backwards, keeping my feet resting on his, like a child dancing on his shoes. His nose was touching mine, his gaze intent and fiery as we retreated until my back was pressed firmly against the white wall. He lifted me gently to rest on my own 2 feet. He trailed his fingers down my hips to the hem of my skirt and deftly flipped his hand underneath, the coolness of his ring on my thigh causing my desire to escalate. "I, too, would like to pay homage to my muse," he said, sinking down to his knees. The trip met a horrifying end 4 days later. We had arrived back to our apartment late after 1 and collapsed in bed in a haze of booze and sex. Our hours-long dinner with Lulite, Ariel, Leslie and her husband, Katrina and her wife, Felix and Siobhan, ending in a torrent of dancing and laughing late into the cool evening. Oysters and other aphrodisiacs mounting throughout the night, coalescing into one passion-filled night, both of us barely able to contain ourselves. I awoke to a persistent buzzing from somewhere on the nightstand, at first thinking that it was a dream and not reality. Hayes mumbled in his sleep, nudging me with his elbow to end the interruption to his slumber. I fumbled for the phone, my hand flapping uselessly 2 or 3 times before finally capturing the vibrating phone. It was 2:40 a.m., and I had 7 missed calls and no less than 20 texts from Isabel, and was fully roused within an instant. There was a link to an article with the headline, "Former boy band heartthrob rekindling an old flame." The moment I read those words, I knew the spell had been broken. I sat up abruptly, scanning the short paragraph or two that had an accompanying photo of Hayes. Face turned over his shoulder in the fading evening, very obviously walking into our gallery, the name seeming to jump out of the photo. It read, "August Moon's most reclusive member spotted at the gallery opening of his former, mature, girlfriend Solène Marchand. Has a withdrawn celeb decided to resurrect an aged love affair? Or is he simply reverting to his old ways?" I clicked out of the article to read the flurry of text from Isabel. "Mom, WTF? Mom, is this true? I can't believe you lied to me. Again. Your new boyfriend is Hayes fucking Campbell? Why did you hide this from me?" I could feel my heart fracture with each text. I let out a sob at the ugliness threatening to resurface at reading those words. I immediately dialed her. It went to voicemail. I tried her again and again. It went to voicemail. Honey, please call me back. I can explain," I croaked, ending the call and seeing that a text had come through from her. "I don't want to hear from you until it's the truth." By this time, I was sufficiently worked up that Hayes was no longer able to remain sleeping. He peered up at me, seeing my stricken expression and my frantic typing and coming to the correct conclusion. "Isabel saw the photos," he said quietly. I froze. "You knew about these?" I whispered, each word twisting the knife in my heart. He said nothing. "You knew about these?" I repeated, seething, leaning closer to him, realizing everything in that moment. I had assumed his flustered air when he arrived at the gallery had been due to a run-in with the woman from his past, that his tense and nervous energy had surfaced upon seeing the two of us together and the memories of Oliver that had resurfaced. But no, he had been caught by paparazzi, had been spotted entering the establishment owned by me, his mature paramour. My eyes roamed his face, praying I would find some indication or inclination that I was wrong. I found no such thing. "I'm sorry, Solène. I have a manager working on finding the leak now, and they'll be penalized and fired before—" He began, halting in his explanations. I hurled myself off the bed and began assembling my bags, furious and unspeakably wounded. "Solène, please," he started, and I whirled on him, fisting my clothes and my phone against my chest, so angry I could not cry. "Do not say another word to me, Hayes Campbell," I said, with such menace it surprised me. He flinched at the name. I stalked toward him, reaching down to point one finger in his face. "You do not get to ask me anything right now. You had the opportunity to tell me and you didn't, and I am so angry with you I can't think rationally. So I will be leaving. I will be going to see my daughter. And if you are lucky enough, I may decide to speak to you again," I said, meaning every word. After everything, after all we had been through, he allowed this to happen. He made to take my finger and hold my hand. The moment I saw his hand near mine, I smacked it away, leaving him alone in bed. His head flopped to his chest, his fingers fisting in his hair and tugging at it in frustration. I packed a whirlwind of activity and motion, and the whole time he watched me, not saying anything, but not needing to. The pleading in his eyes evident as they followed me around the room, blue-green depths begging me to stay. I made pass by his perch on the bed, and he caught my wrist, looking up at me. His face open, and an expression of sincere apology painted his features. His thumb passing over my wrist and hand, the gifts he had given me. I stared back, completely at a loss for words. I loved him, and he still managed to hurt me. He wordlessly tugged me closer and placed his face against my stomach, his arms coming to surround mine. My hands came to rest on his skull, fingers combing through the silky brunette strands. "I love you," I said, tears finally falling, "but I can't stay." And so I left.